falsehood, you're faced with two options. You can accept it or you can reject it. The basis upon which we take one of these actions is a product of our critical thinking capabilities and a desire to know what is true instead of confirming our bias. A lie can travel halfway around the world while the truth is still putting on its shoes. On Brainstorm, we choose the hard truths over the comforting lies. Reason, compassion, skepticism. This is the Brainstorm podcast.
Hi folks, welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio, the Brainstorm production where we interview a variety of folks with the intent to spread critical thinking, compassion, skepticism, and lately, to inform people on leftist politics. I'm your host Cory, and as some of you may know, I identify as an anarchist. That means that I believe in a society where everyone is equal, where we all have autonomy over our actions, and where we aren't coerced into carrying out the will of the state or the will of those with more resources than us. Because I think that all the resources that exist should belong to all the people, and we should all have equal access to them. It's obviously much more complicated than that once you get into the details, but it seems like in the media and online lately, there's a lot of people who talk about left politics in ways that are inaccurate or dismissive. These are complex theories with evidence for and against them, and they need to be examined in an honest way. There is a common assumption among many that conservatism is a legitimate political philosophy, but that anarchism or socialism, or even just progressive philosophies, are lacking legitimacy for some reason. And I'm not even trying to convince anybody to be a socialist or an anarchist, but I do think that people need to look at these philosophies a lot deeper and really try to understand them way more than they do before they dismiss them out of hand. With that in mind, my guest for this episode has gone through a philosophical transformation of her own. Felicia Entwistle is one of the hosts of the podcast and YouTube show, The Utah Outcasts. In my time listening to that show, I've noticed a distinct difference in the way that Felicia talks about socialism. She's often been a voice for progressivism and feminism on the show and in other interviews. And lately, she's adopted a more socialist or communist perspective, and I thought it would be really cool to hear about how she came to consider herself a communist. There's also 30 minutes of conversation where we talk about the relationship between feminism and sex work and socialism and sex work for patrons that unfortunately, if you're listening to this on the regular feed, you won't get access to, but I do include a 30-second clip of it. If you're interested, you can stay tuned for that, and that'll give you a bit of a idea of what you're looking at if you become a patron. You can contact the show by emailing us at mail@brainstormblog.net or by going to our website and using the contact button at the top of each page. If you already love our show and want to support us, then you can do that by becoming a patron at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast and by giving us $1 an episode. Every little bit helps and keeps the show going. And, of course, that $1 per episode will get you the extended interviews as well as any bonus content that we put out. With all that said, I'm going to send you over to the interview right after a promo for another podcast.
Hey there. I'm VP Quinn of High Level Games, a tabletop role-playing game podcast and web community. I and my trusty sidekick and producer monkey, the assistant to the regional manager, Joel, hello, talk about various pen and paper role-playing game products in an always interesting and sometimes funny way. We are a for gamers by gamers podcast that looks at how to make these games more awesome for the fans. Check us out on iTunes, follow us at HLG_corporate on Twitter, like our page on Facebook, or just go to highlevelgames.ca for more information. High Level Games, the industry's first choice in taking your games to the next level.
All right, welcome to the Brainstorm Podcast Skeptic Studio. Today I'm talking to Felicia Entwistle. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, I've had Chris on a couple times, so it's good to have another voice from that show.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
the Utah Outcasts.
He's prolific.
Yeah, he's always putting out new stuff. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, he's great that way.
So the reason I wanted to talk to you today is because I've noticed over the last few months that you've gone from not so much on board with socialism and communism and whatnot, and to declaring yourself an actual communist more recently. So I guess
you want to know the journey?
I kind of want to know the journey of that. And I guess a good place to start is what's your background and how did you get to even looking at this stuff?
Mm-hmm. So, I come from a pretty liberal family, and I'm going to use that, in the American sense, progressive, I guess you could say. I have a history. My grandfather on my father's side was a member of the NAACP, and we are very white.
Okay.
So, he was involved in the civil rights movement. On my mother's side, she's been a big supporter of LGBTQ rights forever. I grew up with just kind of a diverse history, and my family are vocal Democrats. So I was already pretty primed for left-wing politics. And then,
nice.
Yeah. And, honestly, I think the biggest issue with being in support of capitalism and also in support of, social justice would our education system sucks. No one tells you what is actually what socialism actually is. It's really hard to get that information. It's not like I didn't take political classes in college. I did. I took diversity courses and everything, but no one tells you what socialism actually is. And
right.
The best understanding like most Americans have is Stalin, the Gulag. And we're all so used to capitalism. And I mean, honestly, who doesn't want to be wealthy or well off, right? But the reason that we want to be wealthy and well off is because we're suffering. And I know the exact moment when I became an anti-capitalist, which started my journey all the way to communist. And I guess I should clarify, I'm a communist in the eventual sense, but probably after I'm dead. I mean, there's almost no way I could see it getting there. I'm a socialist in the practical sense, Yeah. Just that classic Marxist socialism as a way to lead into communism eventually.
No, that sounds pretty good to me.
Right. And I tend to like to use the word communist, when kind of as a shock factor for people to be like, nope, we exist.
Right.
Yeah. There are people who genuinely want communism. So the moment that I went to an anti-capitalist was I finished ContraPoint's 2-part video on what's wrong with capitalism. Oh yeah,
brilliant series, couple videos. Those are good.
Yeah, she did it. Oh, she's so great. Someday I would like to grow up and be her.
Yeah, me too. But right? I'm way too old for that.
So. I remember I messaged the guys. I'm like, oh dear, I'm an anti-capitalist now. The Utah Outcasts guys. And from there, I guess I just kind of, I didn't seek out leftist politics so much as it just sort of came into my awareness. I started following Sean and Peter Coffin, Angie Speaks, H. Bomber Guy. The problem is, I'm pretty sure I started on H. Bomber Guy, and, I knew about Contra before because I really liked her videos on fascists and
right, yeah,
philosophy tube, and I just started actually becoming really interested in philosophy as a topic because I was interested in film and literary critique, and Lindsay Ellis she was such a good source on understanding these things. And then she ended up basically saying like, yeah, this is also like philosophy. And so I needed to know more about philosophy. And I just started teaching, like trying to learn as much as I could by myself because I can't afford to finish college. I fell into the philosophy hole. And the problem is, the more that you get educated in philosophy, the more radicalized people tend to become on the left. When I was on Embrace the Void with Aaron Rabinowitz, that's how he's saying his name now. That is his name, and I'm trying to make sure I say it right. Rabinowitz. When I was on with him, he said, yeah, that pretty much happens. Like, you end up pretty radicalized. It just became that the concepts, I'd been interested in systemic oppression and systemic violence of marginalized people, as one of them, a woman, with a fair amount of privilege in many ways. I'm very able-bodied. I'm white. Right. I guess I'm not tall. I'm very short. I'm very short. And so, that's one thing, but still, white women are still a marginalized group as well. And, they just are. It's still a systemic issue. So I've been aware of how systems, function and replicate themselves. And as soon as I started applying that to capitalist thinking, I realized that it was a major part of the overall intersectionality related issues. Like, capitalism is designed to promote hierarchy, and the issues that we have with sexism and racism, ableism, are also based in hierarchy. So, right. Eat the rich, guillotines.
Yeah, gulags for all.
Gulags, so many gulags. Totally a stand for Stalin now. No, yeah. I am not one of those communists that is like, but Stalin had some good ideas. Like, Stalin was a monster. Yeah. Just because he wanted communism doesn't mean he did anything that actually helped that cause.
Right. Yeah. I often will see like Lenin quotes and stuff that I really like, and then I'll talk to somebody who's well versed in the history of it, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm not a Leninist, that's for sure, even though there was some good quotes there.
Yeah, well, it's like there was some, there's a lot of philosophers who had some really great ideas, right? We look at the Enlightenment liberal values of freedom and self-expression and a right to your own journey, and they own slaves.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, just because there was good philosophy that came from them doesn't mean that like their methods were super great. It's pretty easy for me to go, like, you can understand the philosophical underpinnings of Lenin and Stalin and realize that they did a bad job.
Right. Yeah, that's right.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
So I guess, I guess what you're saying is like you were kind of on the SJW type of bandwagon, and you saw that class was kind of one of these issues that kept people being oppressed.
For sure. So, Bernie Sanders talking about socialism wrongly, but, it did at least speak to a frustration that I'd had for a long time, right? Like the inability to escape poverty easily, and the desperate need for us to seek out a more egalitarian society. But, honestly, I wanted communism for a long time and didn't know it, because my ideal has been like, we're eventually going to get to the Star Trek universe. Like, we're eventually going to just eliminate money, and, it'll be all pursuit of your personal, like, journey, and no one's going to starve or die, even if all they do is just be like a drunk all the time, right? Like,
Yeah.
Because there's so many other people who want to do other things. And we as a society don't have to let them just drink themselves to death, right?
Right.
So, I mean, I was already there, but I didn't know that was communism. And so with Bernie Sanders talking about some, in my opinion now, not good answers to class issues and economic injustice, nowadays I think that it definitely was like a part of my journey in going, yeah, like we can fix these issues. And somebody was finally talking about them in a way that was getting mainstream support, which was great. But I ultimately have come down to, I don't feel like Bernie Sanders is really helping.
Yeah, I find he's got a lot of issues in the same way that older white guys often have issues. So I mean, if somebody younger, maybe a woman or a person of color or like might have, come out and say very similar things, like AOC, she says similar things. And
there's a big part of my journey that I kind of skipped over because it wasn't like a singular moment, but I had a lot of conversations with Alex Jules, formerly of Dogma Debate. You remember?
Oh, yeah.
So him and I are friends, and he was really the first one who was just like, no, capitalism bad. And my brain didn't like it at first, right? Because I was like, but capitalism, right? Like,
but that's what we're doing. It's working, right?
People have businesses and then do okay. They don't. They really don't most of the time, guys. I mean, I felt like the problem wasn't capitalism. It was that we weren't applying capitalism fairly. And the thing is, you can't apply capitalism fairly. That's how capitalism works.
Yeah.
So Alex Jules was, the first one to at least like help me understand the problems with justice and its connections to capitalism. And he's so educated in civil rights issues, and he's a Black activist, and that's such a huge part of my journey. Is once you start understanding the systemic issues and you start talking with somebody who's far more educated than you in this, then you can really, if you just are willing to like open your mind a little bit at a time, you'll get there, I think. So Alex Jules was like the first one, but the moment I became, I was a Black man and a trans woman who taught me that capitalism bad.
I guess I can see why Republicans probably won't get there then.
Yeah. Oh man, that's been the latest part of my journey is truly trying to understand the philosophical underpinnings of conservatism and, ultimately fascism, because the conservatism does serve the needs of fascism eventually, even if individual conservatives with their philosophical underpinnings are not fascists. It ultimately serves the same master. Just like a social democracy and a communist are based in the idea of helping equalize things as much as possible, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the conservatism it's very much that idea that like there's these natural hierarchies and we have to maintain them and keep people separate and
the separation is just, right? That if you're being separated from the top of the hierarchy, that's because that's where you belong.
Right.
It's just, and that any help that you receive is charity, because you wouldn't need help if you were, you would be in a higher place in the hierarchy without help if you were truly deserving.
Yeah. That's why they keep coming up trying to justify it with like IQs, like conversations about IQ, and like
that one is so pervasive.
Yeah. Yeah, it's always guys like Stefan Molyneux who are promoting it on Twitter and YouTube too. So
yeah. Well, then isn't that so bizarre that like I was radicalized by YouTube, and the fascists are also radicalized by YouTube, but like the difference is that I went to like people with PhDs and I went to people who had like there was so much more information and things to follow up with and verified, things that you could read. And Stefan Molyneux is like, this guy had an opinion once, like, but it's on the left. You can clearly see the difference in the sources, in how the information is gathered, in ways that we formulate our thoughts. And on the right, it is very much like about justification of the system, right? It has nothing to do with with social change necessarily, so much as it is justifying and even hardlining the current system. More of the same.
Right. Yeah. It's almost like, what do they call it? Like ad hoc reasoning. Like they see the way it is and they come up with justifications for it after the fact. It's
like the YouTube skeptic who's like, I'm rational. But what that means is what I already believe is correct because I exist in a rational state, rather than rationality being a practice of thinking.
Right. Yeah.
So I feel like conservatives are a lot like that, in that they're like, I am not wrong in my existence, and therefore, my existence is correct. Therefore, I have earned this. Therefore, this system is just. Right?
Yeah. Like I think you said it pretty well there. I don't think I can elaborate much on that.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So it's I mean, it's what's really been frustrating and kind of depressing is when I start thinking through systems of oppression, I always end up coming back to capitalism. Like we talk about, let's say the objectification of the female form. Well, that would be a lot harder to perpetuate if there wasn't a profit in it.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, obviously, like getting rid of money and workers owning the means of production and a government system based around promoting the general good or the general welfare would help, but it wouldn't end sexism. It wouldn't end racism. There's a whole lot of other work there that needs to be done. But man, it would be really easy to start addressing issues like white neighborhoods if everyone just could move into the empty house, right? Like anyone, this poor family of 6 who's been living in a single bedroom apartment, they're like, there's an open house over there? I can just have it? Yeah. Then they do? That's going to change, that would change perceptions a lot. Because we know from many studies that exposure helps break down biases. At first it raises tensions, and then seriously, it's like within 3 weeks, people start getting used to it. Diversity tensions go away in like 3 weeks.
That doesn't actually surprise me, I guess.
It's so bizarre.
Yeah. Being around people who don't look exactly like you makes you not as judgmental of them.
Mm-hmm. There was a really cool study with people on the train. It was a route that was predominant with white people. And so they started sticking black and brown people on the train on that same route. And at first, like, the white people were very uncomfortable. And there was a lot of microaggressions, and it was, there was a lot of tension. And then after 3 weeks, everything started changing. And they would start saying hi and chit-chatting, and then it just became normal. Like,
right.
Like it's really strange, but people just need a chance to get used to it, and then they do. Our brains are so good at adapting that, we can just get used to things. You just have to be around it.
Yeah. So then if you take away like the economic excuses, like if you say, well, you take away the excuse of, our property values are going to be deteriorated if a new element type of person comes into our town. Mm-hmm. Like if you take that away and suddenly people can just live there without that, there's
no profit incentive then, because I mean, I don't believe that there would actually be an economic issue with
No, yeah, but it is an excuse, right?
It is absolutely an excuse. And yeah, you take that away and then it's just like, I can't make them not be here without violence. And violence is icky.
Yeah.
Oh, that's another one, right? Is reframing the context of violence in your brain.
Right. Yeah. That's something that I've actually kind of more recently gotten into, is the idea that violence isn't necessarily the way we think of it. Like starvation is a form of violence.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at police brutality. I have talked to conservatives who believe that if the police are being brutal, it is just that. Right. And there is people who understand that violence is the tool of the state and that's okay.
Yeah.
And
yeah, I don't know how you talk to those people.
I don't know. I've really been trying just to see if you can wedge anything into there, but I think the fundamental problem is they believe that since their place in the hierarchy is just, right?
Right.
And things done to protect that hierarchy are just because their place is just. They believe that if somebody else were to reach the place in the hierarchy, then they would be unjustly maligned as those other people have been.
Mm.
Yeah. The N.K. Jemisin quote from Broken Earth is probably one of my favorite to explain that. I'm going to have to paraphrase because I don't have it pulled up. Dang it. I should always just have that on me. That there are, none are so afraid or so strange in their fear as the conqueror, because those who have been conquered have moved on and they couldn't care less. They just want to, move forward for themselves. But the conqueror lives in fear that what was done to the conquered would be done to them. Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's the whole thing. Like the fear of the white genocide, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not so much the white race is going to be wiped out. It's that we're going to be the minority.
Yeah.
And why are we afraid of being the minority? Well, because minorities get treated bad.
Right. they get exploited and used and they're policed more and they are, and that would be unfair because I belong in this spot on the hierarchy. This is my spot.
Yeah. No, it explains it pretty well.
Yeah. But we don't, it's just, I don't know. I do not know how to reach people because I genuinely think that a lot of conservatives do value the idea of their freedom, right? Their ability to go on vacations and eat the food that they want and go to the doctor that they want to go to, right? They value it, the idea of their freedom, but they are terrified of losing that freedom because people can and do, and in their mind, because they don't deserve the freedom, right? They haven't earned it or whatever. Yeah. And I don't know how to reach them and be like, look, you would have more under socialism. You would have more time with your friends. You would have more time with your family. You would not have to worry about your mortgage. You could go to any doctor you want because it doesn't matter. You're not rich. You're never going to be rich. You would have more in my way. Now, you would not have the stuff that a billionaire has because no one should.
Yeah. Yeah, that's something that I find I can actually reach common ground with a lot of conservative working class people that way, is talking about how the billionaires shouldn't even exist. Nobody needs that much. And they're like, yeah, nobody does need that much.
Right. No one needs that much. Billionaires should not exist. It's horrifying the amount of resources that they just have and hoard. And by the time you're a billionaire, it doesn't fucking matter. You don't have to do a goddamn thing to protect that wealth. It's done. The system has already got you.
Yeah. I was having an argument with my dad, cause he's a conservative, and, I brought up Jeff Bezos, and I said, well, look at the working conditions in the warehouses for Amazon, where people are like dying on the floor because they don't get the appropriate breaks, and they can't hydrate, and like elderly people have fallen down and died. And he's like, well, just shoot them then. I'm like, now you're thinking like I do.
Yeah. Okay. Cool.
Let's do it.
Yeah. It's, you see, my dad is, I don't know even where my dad is anymore, because in college he loved Karl Marx. He loved Das Kapital. But he also, has a lot of capitalist mindsets, right. A lot of individualism, like you can, make yourself happy through diet and exercise and, like positive thoughts, which I mean is comforting if you're a middle-class white guy. It certainly is. But he also lets me talk about socialism, and he goes, yeah, no, I totally think that, that totally makes sense. Like, I don't know where he's at, but he's like, yeah, no, I totally see where you're coming from with the socialism. But then he's just like, also, but then yeah, you individually can choose happiness, stuff like that. Okay.
Yeah. I suppose it's probably one of these things where we get stuck in this way of thinking that surrounds us all the time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I know I catch myself still thinking of my job, even in terms of justified hierarchies, my manager is my manager and therefore he's above me as a human. Mm-hmm. And I mean, that's not real. That's just because that's the way I've been trained, right?
Yeah, and to be able to survive under capitalism, I think there is an element of that you have to believe when you're working.
Right.
Yeah,
you got to internalize it a little bit at least.
Yeah, because if you don't function that way, if you don't have that internalized just a little bit, then you're going to have a hard time dealing with hierarchies, and it is going to come out, right?
Yeah.
The way I've kind of, in trying to survive, the way I've tried to think of it is, do just good enough, right? Do just good enough. Don't do extra. Don't try to set yourself above because of how great you are at something, because that doesn't exist. And somebody else is going to come along and be better than you, which is fine. But, just do good enough that, capital doesn't target you for removal. Right?
Yeah. Survive.
Yeah. And what I honestly think that, that would take a lot of pressure off of marginalized people. As a woman, you just feel like you have to prove yourself more. You have to you have to just be nicer, more efficient, better at everything for somebody to see you as great. And once I started seeing myself as I'm already good enough at this, and I just want to do good enough that, you can see it and I can just point to my record. And if they don't want to promote me or whatever, I don't give a shit anymore. And, I feel like that don't give a shit attitude has kind of worked for me. People just start to assume that I did do a good enough job because I'm like, I did a good enough job.
There you go.
They're like, yeah, you did. And maybe that's, whiteness coming through. That could absolutely be some of it. But,
right.
The thing is that,
that's actually, sorry to interrupt, but as a white dude, I don't even have to do anything, and I can say that, and people assume I did the right thing.
Oh my God. I was about to get laid off from a job, and a white guy on my team, and here in Utah, the Mormons are the ones with all the power.
Okay.
Yeah, so a white Mormon guy said, I've never looked for a job. I've had 3 jobs in my life, and they all just came to me.
Right.
As I was about to lose my job. I was like,
geez. Yeah.
I just stared at him like, I cannot believe you just said that to me. I cannot believe you just said that to me. He literally told a story about how it was 2 different bishops from his church, his ward, that were like, hey, I've got a job for you. I'm like, you did literally nothing, and you have never had to worry. You are the most mediocre person I have ever met, and I am about to lose my fucking job.
Right, eh?
Oh my God.
Yeah.
It's when white guys sit there and tell me they're like, I don't know, and they just tell me I'm due for a promotion. I'm like, what the fuck are you talking about?
Right. Yeah. That's
when they deal with cops, and cops are just like, be careful out there. I'm like, are you shitting me? Cops get off on harassing me. Cops get off on walking up with a big dick and being like, no. And I remember cops being like, girls, if you cry, I'm going to go even harder on you. I remember that from driver's ed. Cops, wow. Yes, they love to do that. They love that. And it's like, my sister once got searched, for they just pulled her over and were just like, hey, we're going to search your car. And she said yes, but who knows if that would have changed anything.
Right.
They just had the freezing cold. She just came from a work party. She was in a party dress, They had her sitting on the curb in fucking February searching her car. I'm just like, I understand that they're not going to hit me, and in a protest and stuff, they're going to avoid hurting me, but for the most part. But they also really love getting off on having power over women. I'm telling you, I had a cop in high school. I got in a fender bender, stupid little accident in the parking lot. That wasn't my fault. The guy tried to get around me as I was backing out.
Okay.
In a snowy parking lot where no lines existed anymore. And it was really dumb. It was a nothing thing. But his dad decided that he was going to sue my mom. And the school resource officer was friends with him, stopped me while I was running an errand for a teacher, and said, I'm going to make sure that you're found at fault for this. He did not see it. He was nowhere around. He wasn't called to the scene. Nothing. He had no involvement, and stopped me to harass me in school. Wow. Yeah. So, I haven't had a good feeling about police for a long time.
Yeah. I don't blame you. I've had both good and bad experiences with police in my town, my hometown. We didn't have a lot of people of color, so the poor kids were the ones who got harassed, and I happened to be one of the poor kids, so we kind of had the odd run in with the police, and you get searched when you're just walking down the street and whatnot. But
yeah,
it's weird because now we're supposed to trust them because we're, I don't know, adults, I guess. And they don't harass us now, but I still got those memories from back in the day that cops are not my friends.
Yeah. I don't trust them. They don't do anything when you need them to. The things that I had a $200 charge out of my account from, and I'm pretty sure it's from my ex-husband because I believe he accidentally charged my card. Don't really give a shit because it's still theft.
Right.
And or my bank account because it's the same bank information from years ago, right? And I reported it. I gave them all the information. I gave my bank the information, blocked the charge, all of that stuff, and the police didn't do anything, even though that's fraud. Even though that's fraud. And I was I was the victim of a multi-$100 theft and nothing. So I have seen the police tell a guy who had just tried to hit his girlfriend and threatened to kill 2 other guys while he was drunk, let him out of handcuffs and said, just go sleep somewhere else for the night.
Jeez.
I know. And then, like, I don't know. I have never seen the police actually help me or people around me. And I have seen, and I've seen them favor people who should have some fucking consequences. Our prison system is garbage, and and it's completely unjust. But also, maybe don't just like let the guy who just tried to hit his girlfriend just wander free. I don't know. Maybe cool down in a cell with a nice comfy bed. Like Jesus. That would be like my idea. Like, but they don't do that. They I don't know. They've never helped me in any meaningful way. And the best interactions I've had were the ones where they weren't complete assholes. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
I can't really call those good if, like, the bare minimum of just polite interaction isn't a good cop. Like,
no, that's right. I actually wanted to be an RCMP officer for a while.
You have to tell me what that is.
Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Oh, I can see the appeal.
Yeah, like I at the time I was kind of a conservative person, so I believed in like the rule of law and all that nonsense. but
just hierarchies.
Just hierarchies. But I also, believe I was a skeptic still. Like I believed like things should be based on facts, and like at the same time we should be able to look at the context of a situation and decide whether or not to arrest somebody based on whether or not they actually were, a bad person or hurt somebody rather than just smoking weed.
Right.
And when I was looking into it, I found out that they do not tolerate that. Like, you have to follow the letter of the law. You can't follow the spirit of it. Like, and basically it's a group of bullies who just want to enforce rules onto people, and
isn't it funny how those
on a power trip?
Yeah, isn't it funny how those rules ultimately end up serving capital?
Yeah, odd, hey? So yeah, it's always serving the people who already have the power.
Yeah. I'm far more interested in how you went from, I guess we could call it center right to communist, or whatever you call yourself.
I call myself an anarcho-syndicalist at the moment.
Nice. I'm tending towards anarchy, but I don't feel like we have necessarily nailed down an ideal system, because we have a long way to go, and that's going to take a lot of work, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
But
actually, anarcho-syndicalism is one of those viewpoint from an anarchist perspective. That's the view. It's a step towards communism too.
Right.
So.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely. What was weird to me was when I realized that I was for the abolishment of the state.
Yep.
Another funny one, just a side note, just like the abolishment of the state doesn't mean no organizational structures similar to a government. It just means consent therein and transparency. Like,
yeah, and no top-down hierarchy. Hierarchies. English is hard.
Yeah, it is. It's a silly language for sure. I mean, like, I'm kind of the opinion, like, everyone's gearing up for their favorite in the 2020 presidential race, and I'm like, I don't even think a president should exist. Like,
yeah, that's right.
But yeah, I would love to hear more about like how you what really set you on the path to like going from center right to left, like left.
Well, I mean, I guess it's obviously like any story, like person's journey through knowledge. It's super complicated, but I was kind of like a libertarian for a while. Like I thought skepticism made sense for, social, liberalism and fiscal conservatism.
Right.
And yeah. So then,
basically a fascism of corporations, right? Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that's right. Because they'll totally act ethically without any control.
Yeah, people can totally hold a massive corporation poisoning their water accountable without any resources.
Yep.
That was a fun conversation I once had with a libertarian. Fun in that I called him a fascist.
Yeah.
I basically, I pointed out, okay, so you buy land. And he's like, yeah. And I'm like, what if I want to come take it? He's like, well, I'd stop you. I'm like, what if I have 50 people who want to come take it? He's like, well, then I'd hire people to stop you. And I'm like, so they would protect your interests over everyone else? It sounds a lot like police, man.
Yeah. That's right.
Yeah. I feel like libertarians are often, they are, disillusioned by the current system, and they do know that there is an injustice in the way that things are, but they just want to be replaced in the hierarchy, right? They want more, they want more justice in the hierarchy because, if we just reset capitalism, then they absolutely would be the successful ones, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Does that align with what you were thinking?
Well, I mean, at the time, I was kind of just thinking that, I didn't give it much, I didn't give it much deep thought, to be honest. I just knew that I was getting a raw deal the way it was, and that I felt like the state was at fault for that. So then, if without
Not
the
entirely
state,
wrong.
no, there's a grain of truth to that.
Right?
So I figured without the state, then I would get a better deal.
Yeah.
But
okay, so I wasn't entirely incorrect. You would be more successful without these certain barriers. You would be able to achieve more success.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's I mean, and as I guess the farther left I go, the more collective, the more I care about other people instead of myself.
The more left I go, the more I do both, I feel like. Sorry, I had to cough, so I muted myself. I become more aware of my particular needs and desires and what would be a flourishing life for myself. But then I also realize that through collective action, that's true for everyone, right?
Right.
I become more aware of my selfishness in a good way, right? I had a recent frustration that I would love to be an artist. I am an artist, but I mean really, really work. Go to school and really study how to do oil painting would be my
Right.
I would really love to study this and learn under people who could kind of guide me in a way that would make my art more of myself. And it's not that I'm bad. But there's a barrier when you're trying to teach yourself because the greats are standing on the shoulders of giants, and the people who are very good can help you improve what you're trying to say. That's why that's why people go to writing classes and stuff like that. But then I realized, even if I did that and I went to school and I got my degree and somehow got lucky enough to have some of my art start being picked up and making money, I would then be a slave to producing art that matched the marketplace because I would need that in order to still continue to eat. And if I ever changed or pursued art in a way that did not meet market standards, then I would, I would lose that success that I gained. And therefore I would still be in the same problem of not doing my art for me.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's a catch-22 in that, right? If you succeed, it's to succeed in serving capital. And, and that it broke my heart because there is no path for me to truly pursue what I want to in art in the current system. And I felt the sad for a while and then I just embraced it and I'm fine with it now. I've accepted that pursuing it on my terms is better than anything. Right.
Right.
And, the thing is that I realized that I would have more time. I would be able to go to school just to learn how to paint really, really well. And that would be perfectly acceptable in a system that was not profit driven.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, but that's not just true of me, right? That's also true of the poor kid who would love to learn robotics, but has no way to be able to learn robotics.
Yeah.
And one of my favorite excuses from conservatives is, well, the information is out there. They can just go read. Like, that's definitely a bias to only one kind of intelligence, right?
Well, yeah, and that assumes access.
Yeah.
Not everybody has that kind of access, even though they think that the information's out there in the world and you can get it. Well, not everybody can actually do that.
Not everyone can do that. And you don't always even know where to or how to access it. Yeah, they have Google, but I don't know. Have you ever tried like finding truly good sources through Google? It can be very hard. You can find some like vague explanations of things, but you can't dig into the meat of most of these things. I can't go read the Wikipedia about robotics and have a better understanding of how robots work.
Right.
It's not, and like, you can't, like, being able to like have the consolidated, like, these are the definitions and these are how these things apply, and having that consolidated in a classroom, in an educational setting is very helpful. It's very helpful. Absolutely. And so just the information being available is not maximizing freedom in any way.
No, that's right.
Yeah.
So I guess we've kind of talked about a variety of things, but I'm curious, like, what are some of the things that you read or watched that really got you to these philosophical ends?
Yeah. Oh, damn. The reading one is hard because I don't remember where I read things. I read so much and so often. Like, I just start shoving like information in my brain, and then I'm like, there we go, it's in there, but not where I got it.
Yeah, I have similar issues.
Yeah. Like, I really need to just be like, okay, I read, I liked, I'm saving it. I've actually started practicing that, like saving my sources. That's the kind of the other problem about doing this stuff without a formalized education is it's really hard to revisit things. So ContraPoints I've already mentioned. Angie Speaks explained anarchy to me in a way that made sense. And so Angie Speaks does she's so educated in this stuff, and she's so good at explaining what anarchy is. I really like her because she's a pagan, and I'm like, I don't know why, but I feel like it's fine. Like, I appreciate pagan philosophy so much that I'm like, I don't really care what your internal experience is with your faith and your belief. Like, as long as the impact is meaniful, then I'm like, okay, cool. Like, the impact is positive, right?
Yeah, for sure.
It would be if one of these people was open to a discussion of literalism in spirituality and magic or whatever, and wanted to have that kind of discussion, I would be totally happy with it. But honestly, I'm not going to force the issue here, as long as in practice things are going in the right direction. Especially because she doesn't like espouse any pseudoscience or anything like that. She's not
right.
It's very much a perspective thing, I think. And so she's not saying harmful things. She's not like, and crystals will make your abs a six pack. Like, she's not saying stuff like that. It's very much a philosophical thing, is the way she talks about it, at least.
Right. She's not saying, hey, don't go to your cancer doctor.
Right. Right. I would have a huge issue with that. Yeah. But she explains anarchism in a really cool way. She has a wonderful essay about Dadaism, the art.
Okay.
So,
interesting.
Yeah, I would check that out. Then there's Philosophy Tube does a really good job explaining philosophical ideas without it always being like, and here's my conclusion.
Right.
Yeah. Aaron Rabinowitz of Embrace the Void and Philosophers in Space. I feel like he does a good job of displaying how to do philosophy yourself rather than like rote memorization. Because philosophy is very much like art, is super frustrating and not fun to do at all, and I'm completely obsessed. Because there's never going to be like a right answer. A lot of these things are kind of like a, ooh. So,
yep, for sure.
And I truly believe that just being exposed to actual philosophy and educating yourself in different perspectives, particularly non-white. Wisecrack did a really cool philosophy of cocoa, and they end up talking about like the Mayan underpinnings to the way that many Mexicans look at death and afterlife. So cool.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's really cool. And you end up learning about all these things, and you learn about a lot of different cultures. You learn a lot about different ways that people have interacted throughout history, and you start to realize, like, this system is nothing but a broken colonialist ploy to keep feudalism in place, but with different people. It's not working for any of us. Oh, and Behind the Bastards. Listen to every episode.
Such a good podcast.
So good. That one will, I don't think any other podcast has truly displayed the historical ways that we got to modern capitalism without actually like saying like, I'm going to show you how this happened. It's just the historical legacy that is hard to access unless you're an investigative journalist like him, right? Like,
yeah, that's right.
So yeah, fabulous podcast.
Have you listened to his new one, the It Could Happen Here?
I'm afraid
podcast?
to. I'm so scared.
Yeah. Oh, it's scary.
I'm like, so much of this stuff is really depressing as it is. Like, like sometimes I'm like, I don't need to be more depressed. Like,
it's one of those ones that like, I feel like I need to be armed all of a sudden, and I'm like, I'm not a violent person. I don't want to have to do anything.
Yeah.
but I really, it really does instill that fear of like, oh no, it's all going to go downhill.
I'm already afraid of it. Like, I'm already there. So I feel like I don't want to, that's probably a great recommendation for a lot of people. I had another one that I thought was really good. I'm trying to remember now. Dang it. Yeah, dang it. I'm forgetting another thing that, go to therapy. Everyone go to therapy. It will help you, think through these things in a very different context. Even if you don't feel like you have a mental illness like I do, you just like go anyway. Like just maybe just for like 2 or 3 sessions every once in a while. Just go anyway if you can, because it's super helpful for you to understand your own mind, your own thinking processes, and kind of and align your subconscious with your conscious mind in a much better way so that you can understand how your own brain works. And once you do that, you'll get over the fear of a lot of things, being wrong or change or anything, because therapy's going to tell you, like, you gotta be okay with this stuff. Like,
yeah, because you are wrong and things are going to change.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Oh man, a good therapist will call you out on your bullshit too. It's great. I think therapy helped me find the courage that was already inside myself to face ideas that were scary, because, I have PTSD, and so fear and I have a very intimate relationship. And once I learned how to live with fear, I was able to address a lot of other fears in my life and my existence, that I hadn't really been able to accessed before. You know, the frustration with an inability to succeed, you know, under capitalism, what capitalism calls success, frustrations with how we keep trying to change things and they don't seem to change that much, you know, and really being able to approach other emotions that were not just tied to PTSD and other fears that weren't tied to PTSD. I learned how to address fear at all. So I think therapy was a huge benefit.
Yeah. To kind of almost bring it back to the discussion on communism, the idea of success under capitalism, like I still personally have like issues viewing it as my own character flaw as why I haven't succeeded more. And it's, I think that's something that we all have to really get over, is this idea that we did something wrong if we're not rich and successful.
Yeah. Like that, you know, I just recently found myself unemployed again, to no fault of my own again.
Right.
But there's still that part of me that feels like a failure. You know, that food insecurity I'm feeling is because I did something to deserve it, and it's still there. Yeah.
Yeah. It feels that way, but it's a tough one to get over.
Yeah. It's a struggle for sure. Well, and I mean, the problem is that how can you get over it if you still have to function in the system, right? Like you still have to pull yourself up by your bootstraps at some point and eat food, get money to eat food, right? Like,
somehow.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so frustrating. And I'm not saying I use the pull yourself up by your bootstraps because it's absurd, but, you're forced into a situation where, your dignity will be, you can absolutely have your dignity removed from you just so that you can pay your bills. And it's very easy to be forced into that situation. And then once you do have that, once you are taken back those steps for whatever reason, it's so hard to get to a place where you're like, oh God, I can pay all my bills this month, because society will rank you lower anyway. It's so hard. It's so hard.
Yeah. So I guess we might as well get you to plug your stuff, and I'll close out this segment of the interview. Where can people find you?
Utah Outcasts on YouTube or wherever you find, you know, podcasts, your Stitchers, your iTunes, your on the browsers. So, and then I am putting together some video essays of my own. So nice. You can check out Felicia Entwistle on YouTube, because I have a channel there and I already have 5 subscribers. I don't know. But I haven't put in anything yet. I don't have a timeline on that, but I have started writing and working on things. So it'll be art and politics, centered stuff, you know, the things I like talking about.
Right on.
If you like what we're doing and want to help us keep the lights on, go become a patron at patreon.com/Brainstorm Podcast. You can hear the bonus half hour that we record every episode and get a shout out when you support the show. Become a patron for just $1 an episode at patreon.com/Brainstorm Podcast. Or you can support the show by ordering a t-shirt, mug or other gear from our store at caffeepress.ca/Brainstorm Podcast Gear. If you can't afford to become a patron or buy gear, then why not give us a rating or write a review on iTunes or Stitcher? Every rating makes it easier for people to find us. Thanks for your support.
Okay, so that's it for the interview. Like I said in the intro, there's an extra 30 minutes at the end for patrons, because I'm cruel like that. Seriously though, the extra content contains a great conversation about sex work and the rights of sex workers. Obviously, it's up to you if you want to listen to it, and I hate withholding content from listeners, but I got to do something for the folks who contribute financially. I will include a short excerpt from it for you here. I mean, I know obviously there's a sex worker exclusionary feminist. and they often like they lump sex work in with the objectification of women, and I kind of get some of that. Like I get that, right? Like there's a lot of like,
and there is a lot of that in sex work industry. There is a lot of exploitation and objectification. That definitely exists, but that's not the sex work doing that. That's the system around it.
Okay, hopefully that little bit will leave you with a sense of how good the conversation was. Now for a couple closing things. First, I think that since I've kind of avoided doing the What's the Deal segments on the main show lately, I will spend my segment in the next live show doing feedback. So if you have something you want to say, whether it's good or bad, I will read it on the air and I will respond to it. I'm accumulating a collection of YouTube comments, but emails or messages on Facebook or Twitter will get preferential treatment. Just make sure to let me know you want your feedback included in the segment. Second, we got a rating on Podchaser, which is super cool. Thank you to whoever gave us the 5 stars. Without a review, I can't thank you by name, but I really appreciate the rating on there. And if you want to head over to Podknife, really appreciate any ratings and reviews over there too. We also got a review on the American iTunes from someone named White Stash, who gave us 5 stars with a review titled For the Open-Hearted Thinker, and said, great contributors, thoughtful content, which I thought was very nice. I think I've been keeping up pretty good on announcing new patrons over the last couple weeks, but just in case you missed it, we have a handful of new patrons over the last couple of months. In March, Keith Davies and Jesse Hoffner both became new patrons, and Richard Lounsbury upped his patronage to $5, which put him at the Skeptic level. And in April, Driffa upped their patronage to $2 per episode, which is greatly appreciated. And then we got a new patron. Just this last week, Peter Coffin is now a patron of the show at the Critical Thinker level. So I really appreciate all of you. Thanks again to everybody who supports the show. And of course, a huge thanks to our top patrons, Rob Geiger, Richard Lounsbury, Daryl Goosen, Aaron Young, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, and of course, the top patron, Flying Spaghetti Monster, sauce be upon him. To join them as top patrons, you just have to go to patreon.com/brainstormpodcast and join at the Skeptic level or above. For all the things, you can check out the show notes on our website, brainstormblog.net, and on our hosting page, thebrainstormpodcast.com. Thanks to our financial supporters, Magnus, Stephanie, Bob, Glenn, the Utah Outcasts, Zach, Kayla, Freethinker215, and H. Simpson support the Freedom from Religion Foundation, Keith, Jesse, Peter, Kim, Larry, Driffa, Rob, Richard, Daryl, Aaron, Destin Doesn't Suck That Much, and the Flying Spaghetti Monster, sauce be upon him. If you want to join them and help the show grow, you can do that at patreon.com/brainstormpodcast. Or you can do a one-time donation at paypal.me/brainstormpodcast. And if you want to get some gear, we have a store on TeePublic. It's tpublic.com/stores/brainstorm-podcast-gear. Our next live show is planned for May 10th, and our guest will be Yvette Dentremont. Hopefully, my Saskatchewan accent is probably destroying that. But you might know her as the Cybabe. So stay tuned for that, and if you don't already follow her, then head over to her website, cybabe.com, to see what she's all about. I want to give a big thanks to Felicia for joining me. If you want to find more of her content, you can follow her on Twitter at Felicia. I think just search for Felicia Entwistle or Felicia Stormborn. Also, you can check out the Utah Outcasts at utahoutcasts.com. Thanks to Dave for our intro music. Thanks to Aaron Rabinowitz from Embrace the Void for doing the voiceover for our intro. You can find his stuff at voidpod.com. Thanks to Alex Capper-Murdoch for doing the voiceover for our ads. And thanks to Jason Camo for our outro music. You can find his stuff at aloststateofmind.com. All music played is either with permission or under the SOCAN license to play. For more information on SOCAN, you can check out the music license info page on our website, brainstormblog.net. Remember to give us a rating, a thumbs up, or a fave on your podcatcher of choice. Join our Facebook group, like our page, follow us on Twitter, subscribe to our subreddit, share the show, and spread the word. The more you share, comment, and like our stuff, the more it helps the show grow. Thanks for listening, and remember, the truth matters.